was alone with the last of the flanks disappearing in the thick mist. Staring off into the horizon, she saw the early sun penetrating the mist like the distant headlight on a motorcycle, covering up the cottage. She was still a long way from her goal, but she'd already come so far. Laine thought about the sparrow and how it looked frail, but was actually strong and hard-working. Just going to show it didn't matter how big or small someone was, or their voice. They could achieve great things with stamina and strength. She remembered the photo of herself as a little girl riding a wooden horse across a wooden gym floor. Even though the photo had been lost, she still remembered it. Through all the challenges she'd faced, she thought that little girl would be proud of the woman she was becoming. Despite what Morgan had to say, everyone seemed to be criticizing her at once, but despite the voices of her associates, deep down she knew the best way forward. She was struggling, but that still small voice at the back of her head said, "Continuare." In Italian, that meant to carry on doing what you were doing, at the same pace and quality she was doing it at present. In other words, your work is good, keep it up. Keep one's cool was mantenere la calma, and both were equally important for her at this time. When the fog of early morning dissipated, she stood up and was able to lean on her right leg without much pain. She saw the white stone cottage again in the distance and began to limp towards it. She was not as hurt as she thought. It took her no more than 20 minutes until she approached the place Evelyn had pointed and stepped into the valley surrounding the white stone cottage. Where an old woman sat outside milking a cow, and that cow Laine recognized instantly as Donn.
Waiting for the sunshine, waiting for the sunshine, ooh, waiting for the sunshine, waiting for the sunshine, ooh, waiting for the sunshine.
Wasn't technically possible since Donn was a bull and this was a heifer. She was obviously confused by it, this new extension of herself as both masculine and feminine. Laine wondered, could she be a woman in flow of her own strength and uniqueness, yet not necessarily masculine or eccentric or something unnatural? And might it be that where eccentric ends, vagabond begins? She didn't think herself self-important, but she didn't think her work was entirely unimportant either. She had to admit that following her dreams wasn't a tried-true path that someone had laid before her. It was scary and oftentimes uncertain, and much of the time she felt somewhat lost between the places she had lived and the places she was going. Following this same logic of dreams, the gates of Ulster must have been near the place she used to live on Roman Hill, on the outskirts of Hamilton, Montana, which coincidentally was on the outskirts of Dundalk, in Ireland, where Cuchulainn was born, near the place Laine first landed on Dundalk Bay, near the creek bed, and saw Gwen, her boss, at the sea home as Queen Maeve. Yet, in her subconscious, she was still a counselor at the sea home, and Evelyn was with her, and they were driving to pick up a new kid from Corvallis in the van. Then there was a watchtower in Stevie, which must have been at least 20 miles down I-90, leading off from the end of Roman Hill, where the gas station was and the little coffee kiosk called Bitterroot Bean. She and Evelyn stopped there to get a coffee on the way to pick up the kid, and were singing along to the Lizzo song. But that was a long time ago now. And now, only the storybook Irish cottage remained. Laine realized the past brought up sadness, resentment, and happiness, and the future anxiety. But right here in the present was a perfect place to be. The large cow stood in front of the elderly woman who sat on a stool, milking him. Laine recalled that even though Morgan transformed into many different animals in the cattle raid story, the main purpose of her shape-shifting was to make Cuchulainn pay for breaking her heart. She had sought to destroy him and make his efforts futile. Yet this was a misuse of her gifts and talents, Laine thought. Like, she could be using them to tell a beautiful, complicated story instead. Morgan was also able to transform from her young to old self. In this way she could entice suitors. But Laine wondered if that was really her, because she seemed more interested in cultivating things with much delicacy and patience, as well as picking up new skills. There was a vegetable garden in the shadow between the cottage and barn, and Laine walked around it, not knowing a thing about gardening, but Morgan seemed to know. The garden sent out new blooms seeking for the light, just like the fresh buds in springtime, or like a life budding with new growth and opportunities. In real life, Laine was taking the train to her new teaching job. It took about an hour to the school. Switched over to the beeline from Boston College. She was happy she wasn't afraid to try new things, since the garden of her life was continually being trudged up and new things planted. The old woman looked like a turtle with her back hunched over, and Laine wondered if this was from all the time she spent carrying around her backpack with her laptop in it. Morgan must have grown more patient over time and adjusted to the weight being asked of her. Once, and quite suddenly, a young man appeared. He took her backpack for a while and carried it. "I can handle it," he said. "My shoulders are broad, and even the small things help." He seemed disappointed by her slowness, but she said, "The turtle is slow, but he wins the race in the end," realizing she sounded more like the old woman, who was wiser than the young woman. The old woman was bent over, doing something that wasn't quite milking. She didn't know what it was. The turtle depicted a determined, resilient woman in ancient folklore. The turtle's shell symbolized heavy burdens, yet the turtle carried its shell wherever it went. The turtle's painfully slow movement might make people think She would never reach her destination or accomplish anything. But she was so passionate about her goals. She did what she was asked each day with great pleasure, even if in short increments. She lived her life to the fullest and with great purpose, so Laine didn't know what could be better. The woman sat in front of a somber house, facing out across the harbor to the sea. The woman sat on the stool with her hands above the milk pail. She had her palms facing each other, her bottom wrist turned in, so that all of her fingers were touching, resembling a spider spinning a web. The whole time they dripped with milk. She did this for about 2 minutes before turning to the brown bowl and squeezing his fresh milk into a pail.